So God and the Christian Bible are both pro-choice. Hi, I'm Jeremy. I'm a deep skeptic, also a pastor. We'll get to the Bible in just a second, but let's just be clear. The God of the Christian Bible and the Jewish scriptures is pro-choice. And by that I mean that the God is 100% for choice, for the ability to choose, and for bodily autonomy, right? The ability to choose all of the different things. You can find it really in a lot of different places, but right from the very beginning, in the first couple of chapters of Genesis, God creates humanity. And in the metaphor of that creation story, it's really clear that one of the key attributes of humanity is that God gives humanity free will, the ability to choose. And all the way to the point that God gives them the ability to choose things that God doesn't want them to choose, that ruins their relationship with God, because God is so pro-choice, God is willing to be hurt by those choices. And yeah, I get it. The Bible is written to a patriarchal society. There's all kinds of misogynistic things in there. But at the core, God is for the free will and for justice. Over and over again, that's one of the big themes. And taking away a woman's bodily autonomy and even the right for her to choose to survive when there are really bad complications, right? That is the opposite of free will and the opposite of justice. Now, where I grew up, the response to that would have been to say, well, that doesn't matter because the Bible says that life begins at conception. And so if the fetus is alive, then it's murder. It doesn't say that. One of the classic verses that's used is the beginning of the book of Jeremiah, where it says, before you were born, I knew you in the womb, right? Before you were born, I formed you in the womb. And it sounds like, oh wow, if we read that literally, it sounds like it's telling us that life begins in the womb before they were born, but that's not it. In fact, that part of the Bible is an attribution of Jeremiah's role and status as a prophet. And the idea of that verse, it's pointing to this idea that before Jeremiah was ever born, he was a prophet. Like, that's how much of a prophet he was, that he was a prophet before he was born. And this is a common trope in the ancient Near Eastern world as a way to sort of tell you how amazing of a person at that given profession anyone is, that they were that before they were even born. Another classic verse comes from Psalm 139, where it says, I knit you together in your mother's womb. And that sounds great if you just read that one verse. But if you read just a couple of verses later, it says that God then actually formed us in the deep. And there's metaphor upon metaphor of where we were formed and where God put us together. And what that says to you is that this is a metaphor. This isn't talking about biology. It's not talking about the beginning of life. It's talking about something else. And the other thing that should give you a clue is that when you're reading those words, you're reading them in a poem. And we could go on and on looking at each of the verses that pro-life people say the Bible indicates that life begins at conception. But if you do, it's really simple. It's all the same. They're all metaphors that are pointing to something deeper. But there are verses in the Bible that are exactly the opposite, that show that life doesn't begin at conception, at least in terms of religion. So one of them you actually see in the book of Exodus. The legal code of that time and in that place was called an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. That means that if you hurt somebody's eye, they get to hurt your eye. Exactly what was done to you was done to somebody else. So when you killed somebody, the punishment was that you were killed. So when a woman who is pregnant is hurt and the baby within her dies, you would expect that the penalty for that would be, if the baby was considered alive, that somebody would have to die. That's not what happens. There's actually a fine that's paid because they didn't consider babies to be alive until they were born in most of the Old Testament. And then there's the book of Numbers. The end of Numbers chapter 5, there's this, it's called a trial by ordeal. And a religious trial by ordeal is when somebody has to do something, and how that thing turns out will tell you whether or not that person has committed the sin or the offense that they're being accused of. In this case, in the book of Numbers, chapter 5, if a woman is considered that she might have committed adultery, the husband takes her to the temple, and it says that the priest mixes together the water that brings a curse. And when she drinks that water, there's this like metaphor in Hebrew, and one of the popular ways to translate that is she miscarries. Another popular way to translate is that she is barren. Like when eggs are fertilized, they don't implant anymore. Either way, it is God stopping fertilized eggs from being implanted or causing a miscarriage. And if that's the one that you're going to go with, the Numbers chapter 5, the end of that book, is God-directed abortion. So look, if you want to tell a woman what she can and cannot do with her own body, go ahead. You can be a jerk. But you can't use the Christian Bible or God to support you, because they just don't. Because like I said at the beginning, the Christian Bible and God are pro-choice.